Every day, countless people find themselves trapped in draining relationships with individuals who consistently diminish their energy, confidence, and joy. Maybe it's the friend who turns every achievement into a competition, the family member who criticizes your life choices at every gathering, the colleague whose constant negativity creates a cloud over the workplace. These interactions leave us exhausted, second-guessing ourselves, and wondering why we continue allowing such damaging dynamics in our lives. Many of us operate on emotional autopilot, unconsciously permitting others to dictate our mood, decisions, and self-perception. We spend sleepless nights replaying hurtful comments. We adjust our authentic selves to avoid conflict. We sacrifice opportunities because someone else made us doubt our capabilities. Before we realize it, precious years slip away while we remain entangled in these depleting connections. This struggle isn't unique to our modern era. Throughout history, philosophers and thinkers have grappled with the challenge of maintaining inner equilibrium while navigating difficult human connections. Ancient wisdom traditions recognized that much personal suffering stems from our tendency to surrender our emotional well-being to external influences, particularly toxic relationships. Practical wisdom offers us a transformative framework for living meaningfully in a world filled with challenging personalities. By developing specific mental practices and boundaries, we can learn to distinguish between situations we can influence and those beyond our control. Perhaps no skill is more vital than protecting our inner peace from those who would carelessly disrupt it. 1. Recognize that others' toxicity reflects their inner state. When faced with someone's toxic behavior, remember that their actions speak volumes about their internal struggles, not your worth. Difficult people often project their insecurities, fears, and unresolved issues onto others. The toxicity cycle works predictably. Someone arrives carrying their emotional baggage, dumps it unceremoniously at your feet, and leaves feeling lighter while you shoulder their burden. Their momentary relief comes at the cost of your well-being. To break this pattern, practice emotional containment. When confronted with toxicity, mentally step back and observe the interaction with detached awareness. Visualize the negative energy as something separate from yourself that you can acknowledge without absorbing. Practice this technique immediately. When someone directs negativity toward you, pause and silently note, "This behavior reflects their struggles, not my value. I can witness their pain without taking it on as my own." This simple mental shift creates a protective space between their actions and your emotional response. 2. Strategically limit your exposure. Wisdom across cultures has long recognized that we inevitably take on the qualities of those we spend the most time with. Studies suggest this insight. Our habits, outlook, and even ambitions are profoundly shaped by our 5 closest relationships. While complete elimination of difficult relationships isn't always possible or desirable, especially with family members or colleagues, you can intentionally manage the frequency, duration, and nature of these interactions. Create clear boundaries around your time and emotional availability. Perhaps limit phone conversations with a draining relative to 15 minutes. Schedule brief, focused meetings with negative coworkers rather than open-ended discussions. Mute or unfollow social media connections whose content leaves you feeling inadequate or drained. Remember that your emotional energy is a finite, precious resource that deserves protection. Just as you wouldn't leave your valuable possessions unsecured, don't leave your mental well-being vulnerable to those who consistently diminish it. Each interaction represents an emotional investment that should yield positive returns over time. An emotionally intelligent person recognizes when certain relationships consistently produce negative returns and adjusts their investment accordingly. 3. Release the need for universal approval. The desire for approval is deeply human, yet allowing others' opinions to govern your choices creates an unwinnable game with constantly changing rules. Throughout history, wise individuals have recognized that authentic living requires releasing the grip of external validation. Reflect on recent decisions where others' potential judgments influenced your choices. How many opportunities have you declined because someone might disapprove? How often have you suppressed your authentic voice to maintain harmony. This invisible prison of anticipated judgment silently determines countless life trajectories. To break free from this constraint, try this perspective exercise. When facing a decision influenced by potential judgment, ask yourself, will this opinion impact my life in 1 month, 1 year, 5 years? This temporal framing reveals how momentary most judgments truly are. Begin practicing small acts of authentic self-expression daily. Start with low-stakes situations. Express a preference that differs from the group consensus. Decline an invitation that doesn't align with your priorities. Choose clothing that brings you joy rather than following trends. Each act of authenticity strengthens your resistance to approval-seeking behavior. Remember, external validation is temporary and conditional. It can vanish instantly for reasons entirely outside your control. Building your sense of worth on such an unstable foundation guarantees eventual collapse. 4. Understand that your reactions give others power. A fundamental insight from wisdom traditions worldwide is that our distress comes not from events themselves, but from our interpretation of these events. This principle transforms how we handle difficult interpersonal dynamics. When someone's behavior triggers strong emotional reactions, you've unconsciously handed them control over your emotional state. This silent transfer of power communicates, "Your actions determine how I feel inside." This surrenders your emotional autonomy to external forces. Those with toxic tendencies instinctively seek this power. They learn through experience which buttons to push to elicit reactions. Each emotional outburst confirms their influence and reinforces the pattern. Your reaction becomes both the reward and the fuel that perpetuates their behavior. A more effective approach involves creating space between stimulus and response. When feeling emotional reactivity rising, pause deliberately. Take a deep breath. In that momentary gap lies your freedom to choose a thoughtful response rather than an automatic reaction. Practice this daily. When someone pushes your emotional buttons, silently count to 5 before responding. During this brief pause, ask yourself, do I want to give this person control over my emotional state? This simple practice gradually builds your capacity for emotional self-governance. 5. Choose conscious responses over automatic reactions. Throughout history, wisdom teachers have emphasized that true power lies not in impulsive emotional displays, but in measured, intentional responses. Reactive behavior reveals emotional captivity, while thoughtful responses demonstrate inner freedom. Reactions and responses differ fundamentally. Reactions spring automatically from our limbic system, fast, unconscious, and often regrettable. Responses emerge from our prefrontal cortex, considered, purposeful, and aligned with our deeper values. Responding with emotional intelligence disarms toxic dynamics. When someone expects defensiveness but encounters calm inquiry, the interaction shifts dramatically. When they anticipate your hurt or anger but receive composed clarity, their usual scripts become useless. A particularly effective technique is responding with genuine curiosity. A simple "what makes you say that?" can transform a potentially inflammatory exchange. This approach shifts the conversational burden back to the other person while maintaining your emotional equilibrium. Other powerful responses include, "I need to reflect on that before discussing further." "I see your perspective, though I have a different view." Or sometimes simply, "Thank you for sharing your thoughts." Each demonstrates that you remain in command of the interaction. Developing this skill requires consistent practice. Begin with lower stakes situations and gradually apply the technique to more challenging interactions. With time, responding rather than reacting becomes your natural approach to difficult encounters. 6. Reinforce your boundaries with calm firmness. One of the greatest challenges in dealing with toxic people is establishing and maintaining healthy boundaries. Ancient wisdom offers valuable perspective on this topic. Boundaries aren't just about keeping others at bay, but primarily about preserving your inner integrity. People who habitually test your boundaries rarely stop on their own. They'll continue pushing, testing, and invading your emotional space until they encounter clear resistance. Many of us have been conditioned to believe that setting boundaries is rude or selfish. The truth is exactly opposite. Establishing boundaries is an act of mutual respect and authenticity in relationships. Wisdom traditions teach that true strength isn't found in emotional outbursts, but in quiet clarity and firmness. Saying, "I don't accept being treated this way," with serenity is infinitely more powerful than shouting the same phrase. An emotional explosion reveals that the person succeeded in destabilizing you, exactly what they wanted. Calmness, however, demonstrates emotional mastery. The practice of establishing boundaries involves three essential elements: clarity, consistency, and consequences. Be absolutely clear about what is acceptable and what isn't. Be consistent in applying these boundaries, without exceptions based on mood or convenience, and establish clear consequences for when your boundaries are violated. For example, if a colleague constantly interrupts your tasks with non-urgent problems, a clear boundary would be, "I'm focused on Project X right now. I can help you at 3 p.m. when I finish this phase." If they insist, the consequence might be, "If it's truly urgent, we'll need to involve our supervisor to properly prioritize." Remember, clarity is a form of self-love. When you communicate your boundaries precisely, you're affirming your value and dignity. You're declaring that your well-being matters as much as others. This isn't a selfish stance. It's the foundation for truly balanced and healthy relationships. 7. Break the complaint cycle. Throughout history, philosophers emphasize that complaining is a sophisticated form of giving up on action. It's an escape valve that gives us the illusion of doing something when we're actually just perpetuating the problem. Constant complaining is like an emotional narcotic. It offers momentary relief but creates dependency and distances us from real solutions. Complaining has three simultaneous negative effects. It reinforces problems in our mind, attracts equally negative people, and repels those who could help us find solutions. It's a self-feeding vicious cycle that steals our energy and determination. Even more concerning is how complaints create permanent neural pathways in our brain. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient wisdom intuited. The more we complain, the more skilled our brain becomes at finding reasons to complain. We literally create a mind programmed to identify problems instead of solutions. I propose a challenge to break this cycle. For 24 hours, don't complain about absolutely anything. Not about traffic, not about the weather, not about people, not about politics, not about your body. It seems simple, but most people can't go an hour without some form of complaint. When you feel the urge to complain, redirect that same impulse toward one of these three alternatives: acceptance, if it cannot be changed; action, if it can be resolved; or appreciation, finding something positive in the situation. Traffic is stopped. Instead of complaining, accept the unchangeable reality, listen to an educational podcast, and appreciate the time for reflection. This simple exercise produces a profound transformation. Your mind changes, your life changes. You begin to realize how much time and energy were wasted on complaints that produced no positive results. And more importantly, you rediscover your personal power, replacing the inertia of complaint with the potency of conscious action. 8. Be honest with yourself. Throughout history, even the most powerful leaders dedicated time every day to write in their personal journals. Not to record achievements or victories, but to examine their own failures, weaknesses, and areas for development. This practice of honesty with oneself is one of the pillars of personal growth. Self-deception is the greatest obstacle to personal development. We create convenient narratives about our lives, justify our failures, blame external circumstances, and rarely face the raw truth about ourselves. It's much more comfortable to believe that problems come from outside when in fact many are born within. The practice of self-examination isn't an exercise in destructive self-criticism. On the contrary, it's an act of deep self-love, based on the recognition that we can only improve what we honestly acknowledge. It's like a doctor who needs to diagnose correctly before beginning treatment. Apply this principle by creating your own reflection journal. Dedicate 10 minutes at the end of each day to answer these questions with relentless honesty. What are you postponing, even knowing you need to do it? What's holding you back, even though you have resources to move forward? What depends exclusively on you, and yet you blame others for lack of progress? True freedom begins when we stop lying to ourselves, when we accept our failings not as shame, but as opportunities for transcendence. When we recognize our fears not as enemies, but as teachers. By practicing this radical honesty, you'll notice that many of the toxic people in your life are merely mirrors reflecting parts of yourself that you don't want to acknowledge. And paradoxically, by accepting your own shadows, you become much less vulnerable to others' toxicity. 9. Don't confuse compassion with emotional submission. Stoic philosophy teaches us a fundamental distinction. We can observe and understand someone else's suffering without becoming part of it. The Stoics cultivated the virtue of compassion, the ability to recognize another's pain, but they deliberately avoided what we would now call emotional codependency. The true Stoic sees the drama, but doesn't dive into it. They understand the pain, but don't absorb it. They offer help, but don't become a hostage. This distinction is crucial when dealing with emotionally needy individuals, or those who constantly cast themselves as victims. Notice the pattern. Chronically needy people often don't want solutions. They're seeking attention. They don't aim to solve their problems. They use them to draw others in. Drama becomes their identity and main way of connecting. Any concrete suggestion for improvement is usually met with a list of reasons why that wouldn't work. The approach for dealing with this pattern is direct and effective. When someone repeatedly portrays themselves as a victim, ask the game-changing question, and what are you going to do about it? This simple question transfers responsibility back to where it belongs. It reveals whether the person is genuinely open to change or just seeking an audience for their drama. The response to this question usually defines the course of the conversation. Proactive answers indicate a willingness to grow. More justifications or evasions reveal a pattern of chronic victimhood. In this second case, wisdom suggests establishing clear boundaries to preserve your own energy. This doesn't mean abandoning people in difficulty, but recognizing that you can offer support without allowing the person to drain your vital energy. Offer concrete help when possible, establish clear boundaries when necessary, and remember, you cannot want the solution more than the person affected. 10. Protect your time as a sacred asset. Seneca devoted one of his most important philosophical treatises to the subject of time, On the Shortness of Life. In it, the Stoic philosopher emphasized that time is our most precious and simultaneously most wasted resource. While we guard our money in safes and banks, we hand over our time, infinitely more valuable, to anyone who asks for it. Seneca would tell us today that many toxic people are, essentially, time thieves. They show up with constant emergencies, endless drama, recurring complaints, and urgent demands, all designed to consume the one resource you will never get back, your life hours. The Stoic approach to protecting your time requires a radical shift in perspective. Your time is not an infinite resource to be freely distributed. It is the very fabric of your existence, each minute irretrievable once lost. Guarding it is not selfishness, it is existential wisdom. Learn to say no without guilt or elaborate explanations. A simple, "I'm sorry, I can't help this time," is enough in most situations. The people who respect your boundaries will accept without drama. Those who try to manipulate your guilt are precisely the ones you need to distance yourself from. One powerful Stoic practice is to schedule your peace before accepting someone else's chaos. Literally, block time in your calendar for recovery, reflection, learning, and personal growth. Treat those appointments with yourself as seriously as you would a business meeting. When your calendar is already filled with what truly matters, it becomes much easier to say no to demands that only drain your energy without contributing to your growth. You're no longer finding time for what matters. You're deliberately reserving it in advance. Remember, Every yes you say implies many silent no's to other opportunities. When you say yes to toxic demands, you are automatically saying no to your own peace, growth, and purpose. The true master of life is the one who zealously guards how they invest each hour of their finite existence. 11. Let go of the fear of failure. The Stoics saw failure through a different lens. To them, making mistakes wasn't the end. It was an inevitable part of the journey toward wisdom. Epictetus taught that the real error lies in not trying, in avoiding experience out of fear of discomfort. Failure is just a rough draft in the long masterpiece of your life, and each draft brings a lesson you couldn't have learned otherwise. Fear is paralyzing. It whispers, "What if it doesn't work? What if they laugh? What if I look weak?" But the Stoics remind us, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's action despite it. Clarity comes from movement. Mental fog dissolves the moment you take the first step. Swap the verb. Instead of saying, "I failed," say, "I learned." With every attempt, you grow stronger. With every stumble, your footing becomes more secure. The Stoics didn't seek approval or applause. They sought mastery over themselves. And that requires mistakes, discomfort, and exposure. Try this micro-challenge. Every day, do something you've been avoiding out of fear of failure. Send the email, start the project, record the video, have the hard conversation. Don't wait for confidence to act, and confidence will follow. Courage is the daughter of repetition. Remember, those who fail while trying are already ahead of those who never even started. 12. Silence is a powerful weapon. Seneca warned that speaking too much is exposing too much. Excessive words reveal weaknesses, betray emotions, and open doors to manipulation. The Stoic isn't a mute recluse. They're someone who's learned to weigh every word like a precious gem. Silence isn't the absence of speech, it's the presence of self-control. We live in a noisy era. Everyone talks, reacts, and gives their opinion. But those who remain quiet with wisdom stand out. Strategic silence intimidates, disarms, and protects. It communicates firmness, balance, and introspection. It shows that you're not playing the game of provocation. You're on another level entirely. When someone tries to provoke you, pause. When you're accused, breathe. When everyone gives their opinion, observe. Your silent presence, your composed expression, your firm gaze, all of this speaks louder than 1,000 justifications. Sometimes, the absence of a response is the most powerful response. Use pauses. Make purposeful silence in difficult conversations. Show that you control the tempo and the tone. The Stoic knows, those who master silence master themselves, and those who master themselves master everything. 13. Remember, their problem is not yours. Many of the attacks we receive aren't really about us. They're projections of someone else's pain, insecurity, or frustration. Stoicism teaches us not to carry burdens that don't belong to us. When someone acts with anger, rudeness, or envy, they're revealing their internal state, not yours. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, wrote daily about remaining steady in the face of others' injustice. He observed that if someone acts unjustly, it's because they don't understand what justice is. So the best response is silent compassion and firm detachment. Visualize an invisible shield around you. When criticism, sarcasm, or hostility comes your way, say silently, "This isn't mine." Let the words hit the floor. Don't internalize what wasn't born in you. The Stoic observes, understands, but does not absorb. That doesn't mean ignoring everything passively. It means choosing your battles wisely. Reacting to every provocation makes you a puppet of others' emotions. Choosing what deserves your attention is an act of sovereignty. Remember, those who try to hurt you are often more wounded than you imagine, but their pain doesn't have to become yours. 14. Don't confuse empathy with submission. True kindness is a Stoic virtue, but there's a fine line between being compassionate and being passive. Being good doesn't mean accepting everything. Being good means knowing when to say no with firmness and respect. Unlimited generosity turns into servitude, and no one respects those who never stand up for themselves. Too often, we mistake empathy for enabling abuse. We tolerate aggressive comments, invasive behavior, unfair demands, all in the name of keeping the peace. But true peace doesn't come from submission. It comes from firm authenticity. The Stoics taught that we must live in harmony with nature, including our own nature. If something violates your values or crosses your boundaries, it's your duty to protect yourself. Saying no is also an act of compassion, for you and for the relationship. Observe how people react to your boundaries. Those who truly love you will respect them. Those who get angry were manipulating you. And that's a powerful revelation. You don't need to yell or over-explain. A simple, "I can't," "I don't accept that," or "I'd rather not" is enough. The Stoic practice here is silent dignity. The nobility of holding your ground even in the face of someone else's disappointment. Remember, constantly giving in isn't virtue, it's self-betrayal. And no peace built on self-denial lasts for long. 15. The only real competition is against who you were yesterday. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that the true measure of progress is internal, not external. Don't compare your journey to anyone else's. The grass may look greener next door, but it might be plastic. The only valid comparison is between you and your former self. Today's society promotes constant comparison. Social media, appearances, achievements. But the Stoic seeks internal growth. They don't want to be better than others. They want to be better than their past self. And that changes everything. Ask yourself, did I grow 1% today? If the answer is yes, you're on the right track. Sometimes that 1% is a more mindful thought. Other times it's not reacting to provocation. It's writing a sentence, walking for 10 minutes, or saying no when you used to say yes. True progress is silent. It happens when no one is watching. It doesn't seek likes or validation. It blooms in the dark, like the roots of a tree. And one day, without fanfare, it turns into fruit. Create a daily review routine. At night ask, where was I better today than yesterday? And where can I improve tomorrow? This simple Stoic practice transforms ordinary days into steps on an extraordinary journey. Remember, you don't need speed, you need consistency. Time will pass anyway. Let it pass while you grow. If you made it this far, you've probably realized how much of your time is still being handed over to people who don't deserve it. Maybe you've seen that much of your exhaustion comes from the outside, but stays alive because you allow it. The good news is, that can change today. Take one step today, just one. Because your life is worth more than any drama, any provocation, any wasted time. And you know it. Now the question is, what are you going to do about it? Which of these 15 Stoic practices do you most need to apply right now in your life? Drop your answer in the comments. It might inspire someone else. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who's stuck in a cycle of negativity.